you can hold out for 3 days, maybe even for 3 months, on the strength of the mixture of sheer resentment contained in the mass of the people, but won't win a national war. You will never overthrow the terrible machine, and you will not change human beings if you forget to raise the standard of consciousness of the rank and file. Neither stubborn courage nor fine slogans are enough.
Yeah.
So I EndSARS, but where do we channel this energy into? People know that this thing is fundamental. Like, they've ended SARS, but people are not going home. Like, they're not going anywhere. Where is the direction? This thing needs to lead to a fundamental change. Like, so that's what I felt was, the missing piece of that puzzle. All right. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay. So, there are times when the movement goes before the theoretical fight.
Right.
So it was like revolutionaries were running after the movement. Trying to catch up and infuse the need for organization into it. But another that I saw with it was that these, just use the word leaders or people that happen to be at the forefront of this, happen to be ideologically not banked, but kind of found wanting. Because if they knew social movements and upheavals like this would lead us to, like fundamental question and ruffling the feathers of the ruling class, they should have maybe kind of preempted this forceful crackdown. They took it from, you had entertainers, comedians, jokers. They just felt like, okay, if we just be here and block stuff, that, okay, maybe we'll force them to do that, but the response that history has shown, that all the revolutionary materials have shown is that these people are beasts, they are bloody entities, they will come down hard on you. You understand what I'm saying? So if probably that kind of awareness was in the minds of these youth leaders or celebrities, actors and actresses that were there, FaceTiming, Instagramming, maybe they will have kind of given the movement as a whole the kind of ideological direction and, might I say, preparedness for this kind of thing.
That's very interesting. I mean, I have two responses. I know. I mean, Emeka, you wanted to say something.
So for me, I think that any progressive, anybody with progressive ideas couldn't really help but, get attached emotionally to what it was that, young Nigerians in their 20s, early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s tried to do. I wouldn't come down hard on them, in terms of their ideology, really. But it was the beauty of it for me was how fluid, the protests were, and how how people used technology, creatively to protest. So for me, it's the creative form of the expression of what EndSARS represents. When we look and when we decide to go into the nitty-gritty of it, it's essentially a protest against police brutality, using one unit of the police which has gone rogue as the focal point. But broadly speaking, it's not just. Any average Nigerian doesn't need to encounter SARS to know that the police is a rotten institution that needs massive overhaul, or because I don't even want to talk about reforms here. Reforms for me, tend to be go with along the lines of for me it's window dressing essentially. So what am I trying to say here? It's something that is almost every Nigerian's lived experience. And I think that it's important that when we decide to interrogate, why this was a unifying force, I think that that's where maybe, we could apply, class analysis to see how it was a protest that resonated with both, the upper middle class, the middle class, the lower middle class, and the bottom of the pyramids, so to speak. So but essentially, the power and the organization of it, and the fact that he kept on adapting, kept on learning as it grew, and gathered momentum, and as it spread, and we saw for the first time what was possible in terms of, organizing. So we lived in an alternate world for like two weeks, where we saw that, if with the right people, with, the passion, with the right energy, with a committed goal, it's possible that we can build a different country, really. I think that's essentially what, that the power of EndSARS was.
Okay, so you guys have two slightly different perspectives that I think will really enrich the conversation, and I'm tempted to frame it this way, and actually, OAG, you can respond to this immediate question, which is, Emeka thinks this movement is historic in certain ways. Emeka, am I right? Would you say like it is?
You're absolutely correct. Yeah.
Okay, and OAG, do you think this movement is historic in a sense? I guess. Now, we can quibble over what historic means. I suppose any moment in history is historic. But, do you see it like as somehow an interruption?
Yes, in terms of the generation coming to the forefront of struggle, it is historic. But in terms of struggling, organizing, protesting, I didn't see anything different from it, with the other protests that we've had, I think that it's not different from, like, we've had way bigger, protests. It's just that it's more visible and, of course, fluid and all that. And because we've got social media now, people are flexible online, all these kind of things. But, down to the backbone of what we are saying, that you can gather people where you can, make them see, what is really going on, the character of the kind of people they are dealing with, what is the likely response and all that. And when I made that criticism of, ideology chasing after the movement, it was more of a criticism of the people in the left I'll be on the left. Not of the people. Not of the people in front. It's of us that are supposed to kind of prepare the people for this kind of things and let them see that this is the kind of blow that you'll be getting. It's not for them. It was beautiful. I loved every single part of what they did, how they were able to even hit central bank at stopping funds from flowing and all that. These are things that I respect sincerely. But we have to now go past that. If that's the lesson we have to go
Surely.
past that. Like, look, this is like if you're on the left, there are some essential readings, state and revolution. You know what the state is. Like, we can't play with things like that because people died for this.
Yeah.
People died for this. We're meant to let people that look, this thing, people have organized, people have gotten crushed. And also let's just get people, this class of people have now joined, this age group of people have now joined to see that this social movement needs guiding principles, strategy, organization. Because at the very early stage, you were hearing no leaders. No leaders was good up until when the necessity for organization and maybe revolutionary guidance.
Can I even jump in there and say that, like, I mean, it didn't strike me as though there were no leaders. Like, offline, there were certainly leaders. Like, in any protest ground, there were people who were giving us instructions. There were people who were like coordinating from here to here, etc. So they were in the lead. And then online, there were various like people who the crowd looked to for their perspective, for their instructions. There was Files, he was giving very, very popular suggestions. He already had a very large platform before, so he had a large audience. There were the Feminist Coalition. They were leaders financially because they were raising funds, and they were doing a lot of the coordination work. And then there were like individuals of various sorts, including people who were both online and offline, like Aisha Yusufu, like, Omoyele Shore, and others in Abuja and in Lagos. So, I mean, I think it's true that there was this kind of discourse of leaderlessness, but I think it's probably fair to say that what they meant was there's no organization, as in this isn't a sort of EndSARS organization. It's kind of various groups, and they haven't elected one representative, and they haven't named an organization. But there were certainly leaders, right? Is that fair?
I just feel like you've said it's under the umbrella of no organization. So when you say no, a lot of ramifications.
Totally.
Because it has a lot of ramifications. Just splinters into different things. It meant different things for different people.
Absolutely.
But revolutionaries, I can see, this is just a branch of a tree.
Yeah.
That we have to deal with. So let's just pack this thing together and tackle the root cause, for a very, very short period.
While I agree with OAG on some issues, I find that I disagree with him,
So sorry, I just a quick point there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's for me, it's the reason why I tend to take the stand that more than anything else, this is a historic moment, is because I mean I don't know that historically we've been here before. I've racked my brains that I've tried to figure out which protests, in Nigeria before now, from even the 40s, had the kind of unifying force that this had.
But since the 40s, then they would. I mean,
Okay,
then plenty were. Occupy 2012. Occupy 2012 was much bigger. It was a mass protest. Like, it also had a kind of online wing that was loosely organized with no leader, and it had a very, very humongous.
In how many states?
Occupy was massive, man. Occupy was like the labor movements obviously mobilized, right? So it meant that like in every local government there was somebody with a placard.
But now it's great that you mentioned the labor movement, all right? But on this occasion, the labor movement didn't play any role.
They didn't call a general strike, unlike 2012, yes.
Yes. So this movement was simply, in fact, it wasn't until people realized after about a week that this is serious stuff, that these guys aren't burning out, that, some people began to even speak up.
So Pengasan spoke up, and Nupeng spoke up.
2 weeks, basically, after 10 days?
Yeah.
Really. So basically, from my own point of view, how this movement came about, the way it came about, I don't find any historic equivalence to it, really. I mean, people say Occupy Nigeria was big, it was massive, but it was also very divisive.
For sure.
This movement, as far as I am concerned, was simply between the people and the state, really. I don't find that I got that feeling with the Occupy, movement, to be honest. It
was, and one would argue that.
What made Occupy 2012 same as divisive was the crystallization of one arm of the ruling class and the other. It was splitting into two.
Right.
And those broke into another arm of the ruling class. They jacked that popular discontent. I spoke to Mr. Komolafe on this issue.
Okay.
I don't know if you know him. He's Komolafe?
Yeah, General Secretary of FIWAN. And he's the co-convener of Coalition for Revolution. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He mentioned that in every street in Lagos State, there was a mini protest. He was just addressing people, there was permanent stages of, just go on the stage, say what you want to say.
You mean
Occupy? Yes.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
In every because, you come and say 2012, the New Year president is hike of fell. The whole country erupted. That was something that cut across every strata. And then just see the elites riding on the wave that, of course, jacking power again. You see the rearrangement, boom. It seemed as if it was divisive, but looking past games that these guys played, you see that a large swath of Nigerian population were all behind that stuff. It was behind that stuff. But this one now is more visible. We can see with the sinking of the upper middle class. That's because we see that the reduction or the dragging down of the lower middle class, the middle class, it draws you closer to the poor, and that it seems as if it's just it's we have to just look at it, more critically. We have big movements in the country. But why do this keep failing? Why do they keep failing? This is where I stand, because we might have something else again that has another discontent. They might do some. I don't know what they do next, because the Nigerian state is never run out of prizes. But are we now going to run through the same circle? They bring police again, and then
No, I guess
do we move?
That's I think that's something that unifies also. Probably that I think we have an interest in, the question of how can we evolve from where we are to something better as a kind of people's movement broadly, so to speak.
That's very important. That's very.
And okay, go ahead.
People are asking, what next?
Yeah, totally.
What's next?
There is the what next question this morning.
It's just there. If there's anything we want to do, we should not make the same mistakes that the older people or the people before us made, which was not fundamentally changing the system.
Yeah.
If we don't, we keep on back to one form of oppression that the ruling class serves us again. Like Richard Wolff said, a revolution is how you complete the reform process and make it permanent. If not,
that's a good question.
Back to the one.
Yeah.
It's painful to watch anyway, but then the learning curve for the people.
Dankasa ni cheso.
I'm back is over, back is over.
Dankasa ni cheso.
I'm back is over, back is over.
Dankasa ni cheso.
Dankasa ni cheso, babana.
Dankasa ni cheso.
Sorum mi, sorum Allah.
Dankasa ni cheso.
Wayom mi, wayom kura.
Dankasa ni cheso.
The Lekki crowd, you know, even though they were not the first set of people to, you know, convene or converge, then became, for me, the heart and the soul of EndSARS movement. Perhaps because of, sorry?
No, go for it. I was just saying interesting, mate. Sorry.
Yeah. Perhaps because of what that toll gate symbolizes for Lekki. Whether it's factual, whether it's a question of perception, it just became the very site of the most symbolic.
Where is Lekki? Where were the Lekki people positioned? Where is Lekki in Lagos?
I mean,
what makes Lekki significant? To give us a bit of background about Lekki, for people who are not Lagosians or whatever.
Well, but Lekki is basically a highbrow area in Lagos.
Right.
You know?
Lots of malls, lots of Domino's pizzas, that sort of thing.
I mean, it's one place where when they, you know, the foreigners or the expatriates come into the country, that's where they'd rather stay. You know, it's upper middle class. It's an upper middle class neighborhood. You know, and it's really to some extent where you know the rich folks, you know, live and play basically.
Yeah.
And
nice.
Yeah, so the toll gates at Lekki really just has it that it's while it belongs to the Lagos state government, it's said that an immediate past, an ex-governor in Lagos State collects a certain percentage of a fraction of what that toll gate makes, essentially.
I mean, I think we might as well just say, because, you know, it's also like public domain. I think, a couple of things to say. One is that the protests were staged, the Lekki protests crucially were staged in front of like one of the toll gates that you need to get through to get into Lekki, you know, and this toll gate is like, it's on Ozumba, right? It separates Lekki and VI. Victoria Island is VI, and VI is also a highbrow area. It's like kind of one of the central business districts now, probably. You know, a lot of people work there. A lot of people work in Lekki as well. So, I mean, these are kind of strategic points, not only for politics, in fact, not primarily for politics, but primarily for business and the market, and, you know, where kind of as Emeka has just said, kind of upper middle class or upper class Lagosians, Nigerians also reside. You know, and we're talking here including kind of people like Dangote, or, you know, Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, etc. Like, this is where people like that, but also, you know, sort of more popular figures who are in the kind of upper middle class of Nigerian society, some intellectuals, literary people, someone like Chimamanda, for instance, has a place in Lekki, right? So just to illustrate a little bit that, you know, these are, as Emeka has said, you know, it's an area that commands quite a bit of kind of capital, and cultural power, etc. And the toll gate itself, as Emeka is alluding to very clearly, is a public-private partnership which the Lagos State gains revenue from, but which a company called the Lagos Concession Company, I believe, LCC, also manages. And I mean, there's a kind of popular understanding that the former Lagos State governor, by the name of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is supposedly involved in the commercial end of the company. And in fact, his son is one of the managers of what aspect of the company now? I guess the billboard that's right in front of the toll gate, something like that. So, you know, I think Nigerians will not be surprised to hear. I think a lot of non-Nigerians are aware as well that, like, you know, the sort of political former office holders, across the country, certainly in Lagos, are also very involved in sort of business, and that sort of overlap between public and private is very familiar to a lot of people around the world. Between kind of politicians, who have been in or who are just recently out of office, collaborating with various private interests to gain access to state contracts or whatever. I don't think we're necessarily breaking new ground by highlighting that, but I just wanted to emphasize that aspect.
So basically, and I think, on top of what you just said, it's more of what the toll gate itself represented. So,
right.
And I think that converging there was, so when people talk about strategy, ideology and the revolutionary moment that EndSARS was, I think that people don't pay attention to the fact that, these youngins, without being told, kind of thought it through and decided at that point, that place, that site of protest was where that place was where they were going to make their own site of protest, and it wasn't long. I don't think it was 1 week after. It was up to a week after that we realized. So we realized after 11 days, that the Lagos state government had lost 234 million naira because these guys were camped out there.
Right, because the toll gate was blocked. It wasn't collecting. No one was passing through and paying the fare.
Nobody was passing through and all of that. And that, for me, is what creative protests are made of, really. Because what's the point of protest if you're not going to draw blood?
Fine. And we'll talk a little bit now about the kind of strategic successes and maybe strategic weaknesses, right? But to just jump in to accelerate a little bit to the kind of where we are now, if you don't mind, Emeka.
Sure.
I'm just conscious about that we've gone sort of halfway to the end, but in part because of what Emeka is highlighting, that there was a sort of strategic bottleneck at EndSARS at the Lekki toll gate, and because of what you said earlier about the kind of accelerating state violence, like the two sort of trends seem to kind of converge, right, on Tuesday night. Again, before then, they were like increasing reports of the state clamping down on one hand, and on the other hand of supposed thugs, and I put that in quotes, right, like of sort of various people who didn't clearly seem to be affiliated with the protest, arriving and disrupting stuff, either through acts of sort of public arson or acts of public violence, burning cars in Abuja, for instance, or trying to visibly antagonize like protesters or the police. But there were like a bunch of people who appeared to be, quote, infiltrating the protest, right? So that was a kind of big red flag, in addition to the first big red flag of protests being clamped down in Abuja. And then I think the third big moment was when, if we're talking about just a rough outline, was when, this Tuesday, the Lagos state government announced around 12 noon a curfew, saying that everyone had to go home by 4 p.m., and no one should be outside, obviously targeted at the protesters. There were complaints from all sorts of corners about, wait a minute, Lagos is like notorious for traffic, so if you say that we have to go home in basically 3 hours, that's impossible. So, and how can this curfew work? And at some point, the government also announced then that it had moved the curfew to 9 p.m. But still at this point, because people were stranded in various locations, and some people insisted on staying, right, at the Lekki protest ground to continue to exercise their constitutional right to protest. And then, at a certain point, from what I learned, before 9 p.m., the lights went off right by the toll gate, and
before 7 p.m.
Right. Okay. Before 7 p.m. Okay. Fine. You maybe have these details to hand more. So, okay, having just come to that point of, right before 7 p.m. at Lekki, what then transpired?
It's alleged here that
right.
A group of a band of military people, the military, drove there and within minutes opened fire on the protesters. It's also alleged that, depending on who you ask, that at least 10 people, I think, were killed at that site of protest. What's worse is that the allegation also goes further, and we hear that these people who were killed by the Nigerian military were then, their dead bodies were then taken to leave no trace.
So
essentially that's
lots of tweets, videos like of people moving bodies of injured people. Sometimes flag draped people and apparently the group had been singing the Nigerian national anthem and waving flags when the armed security forces opened fire, right?
Yeah, basically that. That's basically what had transpired, there, and it was a crazy night in Nigeria actually, because the feminist coalition movement then started to make efforts to see whether they could get ambulances in there. That there were all sorts of bickering about ambulances being on the site, but when they weren't being allowed to move in and help, the injured, get people, at least those who were injured now, not the dead ones whose bodies no one could find. So I mean, what followed was complete breakdown of law and order. I mean, if this protest, had been successful because they were peaceful before now, I mean, there are other details to what happened in different other parts of, the country, as to where people who, quote unquote, were alleged to have hijacked the protest were causing, were getting violent in different pockets of protests sites across the country, and in fact, setting police stations on fire and all and whatnot. But what happened the next morning was carnage. It was a complete breakdown of law and order, especially in Lagos, but also across different other urban centers in Nigeria, from Port Harcourt to Benin to Ibadan to, I mean, everywhere, even in the north.
And that's kind of the present moment in a way. I mean, it's definitely calmed down since the first morning, but I want to talk a little bit more about sort of where we are in the present in a moment. And I think within that we can kind of encapsulate this conversation around how has Nigeria responded to the first couple of weeks and how it was violently suppressed, how the protests were violently suppressed in Lekki, in other parts of Lagos and across the country. But I just want to bring in OAG now. Are there areas of this in terms of the kind of basic layout of events that we've missed or that you want to highlight? Like other things that come to mind in this kind of intro where we're sort of talking about where we've come from?
I think the timeline, I agree with the timeline of, the events and how it played out, but one thing that I want to kind of keep in is that we must also understand that all these things happen in a cultural atmosphere, and that society is not static. It is moving to a decisive point whereby on the cultural sphere, and when society becomes very polarized between oppressor and oppressed, if you make gesturings towards speaking for the people, you better be about it. Because there will be no room for any middle ground when the duty of society gets to a point. And it is the duty of revolutionaries to call people out. Burna Boy wasn't the only one they called out. P Square was called out. Everybody was called out. Like, we have to understand that there's a cultural angle to this thing. They won't be left alone. No, your core audience can be suffering and being killed, and you're saying you're just a creative. We can't divorce art from what life is like. It's different, you know. You know, in really revolutionary times that revolutionary songs are banned and they're not played. Jaga Jaga was banned. There's this my own guy from Ogun State, from Elivisa. It was banned. I just found out a couple of ago.
What do you mean?
You know,
so these,
on the culturals,
these artists were banned during the protest?
during Obasanjo's time,
Okay.
when you know you have, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to drop out what he said about creatives just no. The revolutionary time will tell you.
Yeah.
And you have to show and prove what you're about. If not, don't talk about it.
Okay,
That's
so
just
there
what-
are a few interesting things to touch on here. Sorry, I mean, so we'll come back to this question of like revolution, and whether or not the extent to which we can describe what's happening in those terms, and where the gaps might lie. And I think it's maybe a good way to frame the coming part of the conversation. But
Yeah.
before that, I mean, one interesting thing you raised is that actually a lot of the movement was calling out artists and raising the very debate that Emeka is raising, and that you guys are both engaging. Like, shouldn't artists have a larger social role? Because, if most of your fans are experiencing these issues, then is it worth talking to? And, Emeka said, this is part of how artists make money. They touch on social issues to some extent, but it seemed like there were sort of more precise demands for them to touch on more particular and like kind of timely issues, including hashtag EndSARS. So a lot of people piled on to the criticism of Burna Boy. Lots of other people jumped in and were addressing, in fact, sort of diasporic Nigerians like John Boyega, other bigger artists or similarly big artists like Wizkid and Davido and Files, the bad guy. And all of these people in various ways also supported and echoed, right? Like John Boyega was tweeting, I think maybe even went on the street. Davido, was tweeting. He even took a meeting with the Inspector General of Police, which, was a moment of some very sharp criticism, a lot of dispute online and offline, for a movement that wanted to have no leader. Wizkid shouted out, again, we mentioned that Fowles, the bad guy, was present at various points. So again, this conversation around artists and musicians, I say that in part to slightly summarize that, only because, it's crucial. It's an important part of what happened, but I don't want to dwell too much on trying to sort of answer definitively the question of what artists should do at moments like this.
No, but it's important that we flesh it out a bit. And I said that to say this, essentially. Burna Boy was being picked on because at the time when Burna Boy's spat with Shuore broke out, we hadn't had the first protests. So the Thursday timeline where we start to outline, that whole sequence of events hadn't, this Burna Boy spark thing preceded it.
And I should say really quickly, sorry, hold your thought just a moment.
Yeah, so people
one moment. I mean, one thing to say, just to clarify in general, and please hold your thought, I think it's important, but is that, some media reports say that one of the first instances of like this version of EndSARS took off in Ughelli Delta State around October 6th or thereabouts. So that was perhaps earlier than the Burna Boy Shuore exchange. Sorry, October 3rd even. So there was a young boy shot. I'm just reading it now on BBC. That there was a young boy shot at Ughelli Delta State, and somebody released a video of it on Instagram. The video got bounced around quite a bit on Twitter, and like a lot of people first learned about what was happening.
And what is the young boy's name?
Let's double check that. So I'm gonna insert that somewhere in the recording. I'll come back and put that in because I don't have that now, but that's important.
Yeah, because I mentioned that there was this name that I was looking for, so
Yes.
I'm trying to work out. Are we talking about the same, person? Really.
Did you say the
But
name?
anyway,
I'm not sure. Is that in the show?
Okay, well so then maybe there were more than one, because there's one here in Ughelli, but there's somebody else that was. This illustrates, of course, also that like SARS was killing a lot of people in various places all the time. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly one, but Ughelli Delta State was certainly one. It sounds like there was another one in Oshobo. Okay, so back to your point about Burna Boy being called out, Omeka.
Yeah. So, but essentially, what I'm trying to say, in effect, is, at the heart of why Burna Boy was being called out was that he was cheating out of leading the protest. Okay, and then several weeks or days into this protest, people like Davido would deny that they were not part of the protest, or they were not protesters in the real sense of the word, even though that they identified with the cause. And essentially, nobody was asking them to. In fact, the narrative at the time was that, okay, you know what? This is leaderless. We don't want anybody to lead this thing. Celebrities, you are part of this protest. You are not leading the protest. So one then begins to wonder what all that row about Burna Boy was in the first place. Was it really essentially about the protest, or was it just plain beef? Yeah.
I just think, the way the thing went out, or starts following themselves very fast. You start seeing how the whole concept.
Hey, OEG, you're breaking up. So you might have to start that point over again, because it'll be very broken up in the recording. Could you try again? It sounds you were breaking up. No, it's not perfect yet. Okay, slightly.
Is it better?
Yeah, slightly better. Okay, go ahead.
What?
Yeah, it's better, mate. Go ahead.
It's slightly better. Are you cool with it now?
Yeah, I'm cool.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm saying that in the era of these fast happening events in the country, and the backdrop of the deafening silence of our creatives, artists, even lending, actions. Now, you can say your voice, but you're able to do more. Like, most of them have been so much asleep about what's going on. And again, when you start hovering around this type of thing, you have to show and prove. He's not going to get the pass for that. You're not going to get the pass for that. And we've seen a lot of these guys interview, or myself, I've seen it. I don't have anything, against him as such, but don't make it seem as if you're doing some profound thing, and then, no, you're not doing anything. You're singing, but lend your voice, or even be part of what it is that they're calling you to be. Like, these times will test everybody. Trust me, it will, and that's just what it is. Revolutionaries know that art, music, they are all part of the ideological struggle terrain. They are all part of it. You have to just show and prove. You have to prove. He caught the stray for that, but not calling, not all you guys are the same and all that. You just responded, I'm doing my own thing, the way I want to do it, or DM or so, like. But don't come and say, especially when you've been African giants, my people are this, my people.
Yeah.
We know you're abroad now. You're abroad. Nobody wants you to come and lead anything. Just lend your voice. People put money.
You see people.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt you here, but you see people. Essentially, a lot of people are very quick to draw comparisons between Burna Boy and Fela, or Fela and different other artists. Yeah, but I'm going to tell you this for free. All right, when people tend not to follow the Fela that they want to, hold as a god. The truth about Fela is that his music metamorphosed. It was essentially blues when he started with Kula Lobitos, and then he moved on to protest music gradually. But I'll tell you this for free. Fela did not lead any protest in Nigeria until he was in his 30s. So people should learn to cut these young guys some slack.
Okay, fine. I mean,
Fela,
I think in here there's a very interesting conversation about music and protest in Nigeria, and I think it's probably long overdue. And I think you guys are precisely the guys to have that conversation. So like clearly, yeah, there's like a wider conversation to have about that. But I just don't want to dwell on that too much. Although I think it's a very interesting segue into the next bit that we wanted to touch on. So if you guys don't mind, maybe we tackle. Okay, fine. I mean, the segue here is that the Davido moment slightly illustrated a question of strategy, and the Davido moment is where Davido, doing all the things that like I think the sort of activists want him to do, as in, somebody with a large platform was supporting the movement, also came to the streets to support the protesters on the ground. Then I guess took a meeting with Inspector General of Police in Abuja, and I think appeared to seem to be representing the movement there. A video came out later on, and actually the video did not look great at all. In the video, I mean, the Inspector General of Police was like pressing him, like raising points about it. I think the video even literally said something like, "No, I wasn't among, no, I wasn't like one of them." And like, of course, people were like, "What the hell?" on Twitter when the video came out, like, "Who's this guy? Who appointed him leader?" etc. And it raised the wider question of the leaderlessness of the movement. Okay, so I think that's a useful way to maybe discuss a little about where we are here, but where we are now, but also kind of reflecting on like the question perhaps of like, how does this compare either to other protests that have occurred in Nigeria or to protests more generally, or even revolutions more generally? Like, how does this compare to a kind of revolutionary moment? And either of you can feel free to jump in, but maybe OAG is particularly keen. What do you think?
I feel like what this whole thing has managed to achieve is some sort of renewed political consciousness. Okay. That's the only thing. Some sort of political consciousness, the possibility of what can be, and of course, like the power of young people to achieve certain things, But seeing it onto its logical conclusion, which is a fundamental change in the arrangement of society, requires more, and I think we've learned that, So I don't find any fault. Only that it can be better. Strategic organization, conscious of some things, the way the state engages, how we're going to organize ourselves. These are things that need to come to the forefront now, so that we'll have, successful, outing whenever, this comes. And of course, it shouldn't be as a result of, packs from the ruling class. We can organize and actually do stuff. We shouldn't wait until when it's killing people, then coming out. No. You can organize and strategically, move to get what we want to get. But everything aside that, it was a learning curve, as all historical process. You learn, you take what you want, what you can from it, you discard what you know.
No, but to touch on a particular point, you were saying that, to bring in the conversation we were just having, like you were saying that artists have a responsibility, in effect, right?
Yeah, they do.
But wasn't Davido kind of taking up that responsibility when he went to meet with the IG? As in, how would you assess that moment? Like, didn't he exercise leadership? Wasn't he?
Well, we can't. People act in the confines of their consciousness, or what they know, or what they feel that they should do. And nobody's out there saying, "I want to sabotage this. I want to make sure that the thing doesn't." He probably went, look, let me see if I can use my influence to do something. But the kind of consciousness you have determines, what you're going to do. like he mentioned Fela Kula Lubito de Sosgan. Like it wasn't until he started reading and understanding what he was up against and what the whole society, Africa and all that. So before the music started changing and all that, I used to rap myself. Before I started reading, it was just normal rap, and then just switching to. And funny enough, I did an album about police brutality 2017.
Nice.
That was the theme.
Maybe this is all your fault. Maybe this is all your fault then. Maybe it's like your fans are behind the protest.
But you see, and this is the problem I find when we uncritically elevate, a human being to the position of some kind of deity, all right, which is where the conversation usually starts and stops with Fela. I mean, perhaps I'm not supposed to say this. It's not politically correct to say this, but Fela wasn't very book bright. Okay, he was a genius. Yeah, he was a genius musically, but he wasn't very book bright. Now, one criticism that's a certain school of thought holds about Fela is, how can Fela, who grew up under revolutionary parents, claim that why did it take him 34 years to actually even get into the thick of things? Why is it that Fela claims that he didn't understand the politics of the world until he went to America in '68? At which time he was already in his 30s, if I'm not mistaken. No, maybe late 20s. But yeah. So he was already 30. What am I saying? Fela was born in 1938. He went to America in '68. He was 30 years old, and he wasn't politically conscious at 30. Come on. So I mean, let's
consciousness route is different. I have strong reservations about it, even with what he's done and all that.
Yes,
I have some strong reservations.
I mean, and I think we probably all have very, very strong reservations about Fela Kuti.
What very standing is that there's no such thing as deifying someone. Even learning and all that, they all have their mistakes and all that. So the moment we choose who becomes the front guy or whatever.
No, OAJ, I'm not piling on you. I mean, but because I followed this conversation really closely on Twitter. Yeah, and that's what I'm speaking to.
Yeah. Of course, it's even the people that they like that. A lot of people are not conscious. Like I know how I was years before I stumbled into revolutionary material. I cringe at things that I said, what I might be thinking. So we give everybody space to arrive at their consciousness and all that, but in whatever little way people can try, just be really devoted to doing what it is that you're saying you're doing. Fine. You might have been putting money out there, maybe that just put fire in his ass.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, excellent. No, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that put fire under his ass to do.
Okay, look. Let me try to move this conversation forward in this way, and I don't want to rupture.
Maybe I can because what I want to say I think is important.
Okay.
Really. So maybe it then moves the conversation forward.
I think everything you say is important.
Yeah. So I think that it's also important that we delineate what the EndSARS process was,
right,
and what revolutionary times or moments are.
Okay.
Which is also distinct from the eventual revolution. And I think it's important to do that because we also need to understand that revolutions aren't sprints, they're marathons.
Okay, excellent. So you were going where I wanted to go. I mean, I wanted to be like, so is this a revolution? How is it not? How is it, what? So I think that's where we're all going. So yeah, the floor is yours again, MX, sorry.
Yeah.
Go for it, Emeka, sorry.
Okay, yeah, so for me, it's that distinction is important. Now, while I find that for the last 2 weeks we lived in it was a time, and even up till now we sense that it's it's not ended, it's not closed, but we witnessed the beginning of a revolutionary moment, and this is what brings me to my own criticism of what is known as the Nigerian Left. Okay, I happen to think that it doesn't exist, or that where it exists, it is essentially not functional. Because a lot of all of this, strategy, talk about strategy, or talk about how the movement could have been guided, some of the mistakes that they made. I mean, if we had a revolutionary core of any real substance, they could have seized on this moment, And I'm not saying that it wouldn't have ended the way that it ended, but we would know that, okay, going forward, this is what we need to do. These are the mistakes that we made, and these are the lessons learned. But unfortunately, the reason why we're going back and forth about this and not knowing where, and the question is popping out on Twitter, because this is the time for that left, if it did exist, to say, okay, you know what? Since you guys are pretty much tired of the same old shit, whether it comes in the PDP cloth or whether it comes in the APC cloth, here is another alternative. But we don't find that anybody's doing that kind of work.
But wait a minute, wasn't the left, what's left of it, wasn't that segment, weren't some of those segments, organizations, etc., involved pretty actively? I mean, we were talking about Shore earlier. I mean, yeah, maybe you want to comment on this OAG, but wasn't the left involved?
Well, the thing is, my own organization, the criticisms that Emeka came with is exactly what we came up with. Like, look, we can't just be adapting, waiting for, because most of them guys that are there now, they're like old school guys. Still
within the existing left, right?
Still waiting on, still waiting on labor unions, not adapting to the times, So we're like, look, you guys must.
But are you saying that the labor? Are you saying that the labor unions are relevant in these times?
No. I'm saying the base of what we call the left, like kind of the old school guys that have not adapted and adopted, strategies of engaging modern forms of struggle now.
Okay.
Most of them are just sitting down there waiting for labor unions. Like even the October 1st protests, they were waiting for the labor unions to come on board, and it was just showed. I said, look, labor union is not going to do it. Let's just go out there and do whatever it is that we have to. So even the left itself is not. I think they are just still asleep, that kind of thing. So that's the main problem, and
right.
That leads to not present the kind of alternatives that the people need to see and hear to galvanize their minds, to move in another direction. So I agree perfectly. Well, the thing that I said, So the left itself has to get it together. They are still asleep, no organization, no social media presence, and it's just essentially maybe take it back and all that, just do the protests, so that's the main problem. That's one of the major problems and criticisms that, we even have.
Okay, but there was a segment of the left that got involved, right? Like the Take It Back people.
Yeah.
AAC.
Yeah, indeed, but yeah, and we have to understand that the AAC, Take It Back and all, they're under the Revolution Now umbrella.
Yes.
See? So they were kind of pushed out of the door. You people should get out with your revolution agenda. They were rapidly pushed out of the thing. And those ones just, look, man, we are going to be here. We're not going to wear any orange beret. We're not going to do this. In fact, Alausa was there. We're talking to some people. I saw some of them on ground talking to some people and all that. But the way the thing played out, that one says out of their hand based on not having too much, organization or movement. But it kind of went. That's why I said in the earlier speeches that it was like they were running after the movement.
Right. So there was a way in which people people at the protest grounds, people online, they kind of explicitly pushed against a kind of revolutionary hashtag or framing, taking over.
I think revolution now is like maybe someone's personal agenda.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they didn't see it as part. It was a subset of EndSARS is a subset of revolution now. It's part of the Coalition for Revolution's demand to end police brutality, and all that. But they just saw it as two different things. And when those ones were showing up to train solidarity, the revolution now, yes, they chased them out of the place.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's crazy, man. The thing is crazy.
No.
Yeah.
But while while that might be one way to look at it, there are other ways. I mean, to look at that.
Yeah.
You know, which is why I'm very careful when I say EndSARS protest. I'm more comfortable with EndSARS protest and not movement. What happens from here on out will determine whether EndSARS is a movement or not. But the point I'd like to make is this. I have my own, reservations about, the person called Showore, and that kinds of, carries on into what revolution now stands for. Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that one of the best things that EndSARS protesters did, as decentralized as it was, in terms of leadership structure, was to recognize the clear and present danger that a figure like Showore posed. If Showore had been allowed to take part in that movement in any substantive way, you would have gotten the crackdown much earlier. All right? Because this is some guy who went and contested in what essentially, and this is left speak that I'm trying to use now, essentially was a bourgeoisie election, and then failed woefully, and then came back and realized that, okay, we can also get regime change some way through revolutionary means, and for Christ's sakes, he tried to push this on his own platform, and it didn't work, and then young Nigerians came together and said, what, enough is enough. We can't be living on that fear in our own country. We can't, be brutalized by the police in our own country, especially because we pay these people, And then, some guy then sees this, of course, recognizes the moment for what it is, a revolutionary moment, and then decides that he wanted to be a part of it. In fact, his strategy was to hijack it in the first place.
Wait a minute. I guess I want to say, Emeka, these are good points. This is, of course, like the EndSARS conversation and not the Revolution Now conversation, which we should also have. Yeah. I think we're sort of, again, a good set of there's a good sort of perspectives in the room for that conversation, and it's worth engaging with critically. But I mean, I think, and not to invalidate the points you're raising, I guess, where we might agree is that, what OAG has said, EndSARS has been a part of the Coalition for Revolution's demands, so even prior to this. But it's also true, as you say, Emeka, that this new EndSARS movement, let's say, or EndSARS, the protests and the online, sort of physical and online protests over the course of the last couple of weeks has not been under the Revolution Now umbrella. In fact, it's been a separate thing, and there have been a lot of people who were tweeting EndSARS or who were chanting EndSARS who did not want to associate with Revolution Now for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And I think that leads very naturally, if you don't, into this wider conversation around the question of leaderlessness, right? Because it's something we're talking about right before we started recording. Is this fact that at various times, either influential people within both online circles or even people who are kind of directing protest on ground resisted identification as the leader or a leader of the protest or of the movement. So there was a sense that people were continually resisting being identified as a leader. And I think there was even a moment when someone, who goes by the hash, the Twitter handle Shegalink, right? And his full name will escape me, but let's just stick with the Twitter handle.
Shegun Awusoyan.
Right, Shegun
Awusoyan. But you had to go there, right?
Well, I mean, we can decide how far in there we go, but the point I'm making is that, okay, I just want to illustrate, and for those who don't know about this, there is some controversy here, but what I'm trying to discuss now is like this question of leaders or leaderlessness, because we've kind of been touching on it overtly or implicitly, both in the conversation about artists and what role they should play, and in this conversation around the left and what role it should play. So, what I'm saying is one thing that happened was that, the movement and the protest at various points, various, individuals within identified as leaderless or as not being leaders. Whereas there is somebody who has been online a lot of times providing some forms of leadership around police brutality issues, who broke with, at a certain moment, some of the more influential groups that were part of the whole EndSARS agenda in the last couple of weeks. So there was a kind of overt spat between Link and the handlers of the Feminist Coalition Twitter page, if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken, where Link tweeted saying that the movement has been hijacked, and he was quoting the feminist, or sort of pointing to the Feminist Coalition, saying that EndSARS has been hijacked, and I think he said by this cult, right? And it sounded there like he was referring not just to the Feminist Coalition, but to the wider sort of leaderless bodies, figures, organizations, entities, individuals that had emerged under the banner of EndSARS, right? So that's my perception of it. But where do you guys come in, both on the question of leaderlessness, touch on the Link moment if you want, but yeah, beyond that, like what was that leaderless thing about, and to what extent was that either a strength or a limitation of the movement so far?
So, do you want to say it, Emeka?
Okay, yeah, so let me just take a stab at it. I tried as much as possible not to get embroiled with what Segalink, was talking about. At once I got, the meat of what it was that, his own grievance was. And I mean, if I understood him, he basically was making the point that this thing, a lot of work has gone into it, and it has more or less been consultative between his own organization and the Nigerian police force.
Okay, Shagalink has, or he's the sort of head of an organization that has long been engaged in police reform issues, and right, if I'm not mistaken, and I think on Twitter he also often responds to police complaints that people put on Twitter, trying to either direct them to like police agencies that deal with these issues, or trying to find some sort of solution or settlement, right? I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think the point I was driving at is this. You hit the nail on the head right there when you said that his own form of advocacy was more of this whole messianic thing where people complain to him on Twitter and then, about, their own experiences and, of police brutality, and then he steps in to help, using his contacts and all of that. But that's different from what EndSARS
right. So it sort of blurred the boundaries of like charity and advocacy.
Yeah,
a bit, and like
So while he was pushing for reforms through consultative means, and he's been doing this now for 3 years, it's clear to us that in that 3 years there has been panels and panels upon panels, that have been set up to look into police reforms, with a view to seeing how it is that we can reform that rogue unit called the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, But it doesn't seem that much has come out of it, because what eventually happens is that, panels are set up, reports are submitted, some things are recommended, but nothing is done about it, So for me, it's one way of going about it, which isn't even effective, you ask me, if we're looking at institutional change. Because anybody who has any idea what the Nigerian police force is, knows that the rot it's unimaginable, for Christ's sake. And this is why I make the distinction between the top brass of Nigerian police and the rank and file. it's a complex, web of corruption in there. But it's one is corrosive, one is what's it called? The other one is I forget the word for it now. But it's unimaginable. And then what EndSARS represented, to many people, and that's why they jumped in on it, was that we're looking for fundamental institutional change. So EndSARS wasn't just about SARS youth. It was about the whole freaking police force. It was about the nexus between the police and the political class. Really, EndSARS was going for the heart of what's wrong with the Nigerian society.
Well, Emeka, but look, I mean, there are a lot of people who would say EndSARS was about ending SARS, and then it was about ending SWAT. So, I mean, as we've said, like, there are a lot of, there are a lot of perspectives about this question, and so there's, I don't think it's fair to impose a unifying narrative. Yes, for a lot of people it was about more fundamental shifts in, like, policing in society, more generally. But for a lot of people it was specifically about ending that unit, at least as a starting point. But, I mean, even before that, even before entering into sort of the varieties of perspectives on police reform, I think there's a conversation around, like, the leaderless question, and why EndSARS kind of overran what Shegelink had been doing before. And I think you're saying in a way that there was a group of people who were like, okay, we are dissatisfied with that approach, with his approach over the course of the last few years, and his and other people's approach, and we need something more urgent, and that's why, like, constant protest was necessitated, right? That's why the sort of taking to the streets permanently without negotiating seemed necessary. Do you, OAG, or you, Emeka, whoever, do you think that helped, that this new approach beyond Shegelink of, like, taking to the street and not sending any representative to speak with the police or to speak with the government, either in Lagos State or in various states or at the federal level, do you think that approach worked?
But you see, let me just point this out. Okay, if EndSARS really was about just ending that unit, then the protest should have stopped days ago when the president issued a broadcast on social media saying that this unit has been disbanded, and
No, because, of course, I mean, but the protesters would say
if that's what it was essentially about, then there's no reason why that protest should happen.
No, but lots of people said, look, let's draw a distinction between audio disbanded. Even at the protest ground, people were like, oh, this is what they call audio, as in you just say it's disbanded, which has happened 4 times before, by the way, and nothing happened. So people were like, no, we want, and that's why people said, okay, there's a 5 for 5. Here are 5 demands that will symbolize that SARS, what it represents to us, has ended.
Yes, and that's where the 5 of 5 demand makes the issue of EndSARS bigger than just ending the unit, which is why the protest actually did continue after the president gave his word, because it's bigger than that. So you're talking about even police emoluments, the enumeration, so and so what we're talking about is bigger than just ending one.
No, fair enough.
That ending one unit. Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about essentially. So we can go on to the question about leaderless structure.
No, it's a fair point, and we can even dwell, like the demands themselves, that's a fair point. And so, I don't know, maybe OAG, you want to get into this and, talk a little bit maybe about the kind of format of the organization in terms of this sort of question of a lack of leadership, and then also some of the demands, like, what was the strengths, where would you want the left to have intervened more, how would a left intervention have changed, perhaps ideally, like the nature either of the demands or of the organization?
I think what the left needs to do first is to get itself in order and build a base that has enough capacity to communicate that we need a systemic change in the country, which includes SARS, SWAT, the government system, everything. And like he said, the protest didn't end because the people were yearning for something more fundamental.
Absolutely.
But where does this energy go? Where does this energy go? No, nobody knows. The thing was just exploding and exploding and exploding with nowhere to direct this energy, especially, with the poverty and opportunities for the lumpen class of society to, get into this. Like, there are a lot of things to consider when you're going into social movements. And while this was going on, I was kind of rereading Fanon's chapter 2 of Wretched of the Earth. That the title of that chapter is Continuity is Weaknesses and Strengths.
Who be Fanon?
Okay, you know who Fanon is, but I get your point.
Franz Fanon.
Yeah. I'm just playing around. Yeah, continue.
I escaped.
Yeah.
But there was one part of that thing that I liked. It says you can hold out for 3 days, maybe even for 3 months, on the strength of a mixture of sheer resentment contained in the mass of the people, but don't win the national war. You will never overthrow the terrible machine, and you will not change human beings if you forget to raise the standard of consciousness of the rank and file. Neither stubborn courage nor fine slogans are enough.
Yeah.
So EndSARS, but where do we channel this energy into? People know that this thing is fundamental. They've ended SARS, but people are not going home. They're not going anywhere. Where is the direction? This thing needs to lead to a fundamental change. So that's what I felt was, the missing piece of that puzzle. And honestly, I do not blame anybody that came.
No, but have they ended SWAT?
I don't even know it. The way the Nigerian.
No, but I think that's part of my point that I was making to Emeka. Although I totally buy his point about the 5 demands.
There's still SWAT.
But yeah, as far as even the basic hasn't happened yet. SARS as such was just renamed SWAT. So a lot of people were still on the street in part because nothing had changed. SARS hadn't been ended. So. I agree with both of you. I agree with both of you.
No. Here's what I think.
Okay, go for
it. If the demand, as the hashtag says, EndSARS, if that's the only demand that's being made, it's been met. No, hold on. Because what we hear, whether we believe them or not, is another thing. What we hear is that the unit called SARS has been disbanded, and that another unit called SWAT has been constituted, and that no member of the disbanded unit of SARS will become a member of SWAT. So technically, if you ask me, SARS had been disbanded, so SARS had ended.
Of course, we don't believe them, and very few people believe them. So I guess I just want to say that, the debate there was was it more than EndSARS or less? And it certainly wasn't less. For a lot of people, they felt like SARS itself had not fundamentally ended, or because it had just gotten a new package. A lot of people, didn't believe that was a fair, that was the government's decision to announce SWAT was a good faith response. And beyond that, the other 5 points, the other points on the agenda, none of them was fully responded to, only some in part. There was already some movement towards doing psychological reevaluation for police officers, which I think was item number 5 of the agenda. There was also some move towards discussing salary increments for the police, which I think was another of the 5 agendas, but none of that was fully resolved. So both by the EndSWAT, I guess what I'm saying is both by the sort of EndSWAT, EndSARS standard and by the 5 points standard, the government hadn't really met any of the demands fundamentally, right? But you guys are raising a wider point, which I think should be a question that we discuss rather than something we conclude about. as to whether or not people were making much more foundational demands. And if they were they articulated and like kind of, are they being articulated in ways that seem hopeful, in ways that seem like they might lead us somewhere? Or are there also things to be wary of and to be kind of critical about at this stage? And I think that brings us to the present moment in many ways, right? Because right now, the curfew has worked. The curfew has effectively stopped most of the protests. So there aren't really placards being waved, to the extent that we had before anywhere, really. The president came out last night, finally gave a speech. A lot of people were saying, okay, where's the president? And in his speech, he basically made no mention of the protesters who had been killed by either military or the police, but rather emphasized that his party had done a lot of programs for youth, sort of poverty alleviation, entrepreneurship, whatever programs for the youth. So, that's all he really had to say to the youth. And then, he commiserated with the members of the police force who have lost their lives, which obviously is also very sad. And then made mention to the fact that the palace of the Oba in Lagos had been, the sort of traditional aristocrat, if you want to call him that, in Lagos, had been invaded by people. So, and he was commiserating with the Oba. So in a lot of ways, that took a lot of the steam. It was very disappointing for people online. The comments online were just like, wow, this is like totally gaslighting, because he didn't really even make mention of the fact that protesters were shot and killed. One of the demands that the sort of agenda had was that, there be compensation for people who have suffered unjustly, and he said nothing of that. And obviously that's one of the most visceral, most sort of, emotionally resonant demands. So at this stage, the government appears to have sought or be seeking to radically demobilize the movement, and it's, a lot of the people who are protesting are now clearly quite distraught. So I guess, I'm trying to raise maybe a bit of a transition from, where we assess a little bit like where are we now vis-a-vis, the progressive aspects of it, and I know we're quite pressed for time. So to sort of sum up, like where are we now? Like what aspects of this remain that seem progressive, that seem like they can take us somewhere, and where to from here? Where to from here, right?
Yeah. So let me take a stab at it before OAG goes in. And that's because I don't want to lose my train of thought. It's interesting that you raised this conversation, because what struck me just now was that what I think the government has succeeded in doing by its show of force at Lekki Tollgate is this. Nobody claims that the government doesn't have strategic thinkers, as well. So what I think was that they had fingered the Lekki Tollgate as the core of the heart of the protests, and at once you could get that group of people, you could get them off the streets, then you would have severed the link between the movement in its physical form and in its online reincarnation.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that what we should think about right now for the next push is how to build on the structures that exist online, and galvanize in terms of organization, and actually do that bit of the work that wouldn't be televised, that wouldn't be on Twitter, the real grunt work.
What do you mean when you say that the online and the offline have been severed?
Well, so what I think what I'm getting at here, this is something that's just coming to me, is that when you think about it, what the support that the feminist coalition did render was one that was more organizational. So
yes,
they saw to it that people who got arrested in the physical space got released. They saw to it that people who needed medical aid got it, people who needed refreshments got it. So they kind of fueled the organization using funds that they managed to raise, kind of fueled the physical protests, not just in Lekki, but across the country.
Yes, and I think they've now said this morning that they're not funding protests anymore.
Yeah. So that's the after effect of what happened. It was. So if you read any meaning into that show of force and the president's speech afterwards, you would see that it was basically geared at instilling fear in what's in the minds and the hearts of young Nigerians, whether they be online protesters or guys who are physically present at protest spots all over the country. But I also know that whatever it was that panned out at the toll gates in Lekki was ill thought by the Nigerian government, because what followed was complete breakdown of law and order, whereas what was there in the first place was civil disobedience. So so that's what I think. But going forward, I think that
sorry, go ahead.
That we can build on the organization. I mean, you saw that we had feminist coalition had helpline numbers, that you could dial into. They have a database of maybe 50, 60, 70 lawyers, So these are things that can be built going forward, And then most importantly, the Nigerian youth then has now realized that his or her voice is important, and that, at any time if there's ever an opportunity that presents itself for us to use that voice, for them to use that voice collectively, they wouldn't hesitate to do that, because those certain structures are already in place. It's just so basically, that in a nutshell is what.
Okay, I mean, that's a perspective, I guess. Okay, just to clarify one point, when you were talking about breakdown of law and order, you meant that in the morning after, since Wednesday morning, after the shooting in Lekki and in other areas of Lagos, where protesters were killed by, army or police officers, the next morning there was a lot of tension in various parts of Lagos. There were actually physical altercations between, sort of members of the public, often young men in neighborhoods who were kind of called thugs or hoodlums in a lot of the media coverage. But these guys, sort of burnt tires, a kind of reflection of anger, and in some cases, broke into a very interesting set of public or private properties, right? So several houses were vandalized. Okay, the Oba of Lagos's house was vandalized. Who else? I think they say the governor's mother's house in Surulere was vandalized, or destroyed, burnt. So there was what was touched.
Right,
it was burnt down.
Places that you talked about.
It was burnt down. I mean, the first thing that was burnt down actually was probably the Lekki toll gate itself. So the toll gate itself was burnt down. And TVC station, which is near where Emeka lives, and we won't go into his involvement that wider question at all. I'm parody, by the way. But TVC was burnt down, right? So that's what you're referring to when you talk about the breakdown of law and order. There were several.
Yes,
there was looting in Lekki, right? ShopRite and a few other places were looted. So there was a sort of robust kind of response from a bunch of people who were quite clearly emotional about maybe not only what had happened, but the kind of wider context, right?
Yeah, it's actually very, very important that you even draw my mind to this, because I almost always forget that Lekki toll gate was burnt down.
Yes.
Actually. Now, who burned down the Lekki toll? Peaceful protesters?
Right. So there were people who emerged who dispensed with the peaceful method, right? But clearly were still angry about police,
Yes, but
SARS, security, etc.
were they part of that protest, the peaceful protest itself? I mean, so because we're talking essentially about arson here. So the arsonist also part of that protest? Because now that you mentioned, I then realized that the first place that got burnt or got touched was that site of the protest that had represented for over 10, 11 days the most peaceful site of protest in Nigeria. But essentially, once the army came in, the natural response of those peaceful protesters was to touch Lekki Toll.
Right.
And then that then sent ripple effects around Nigeria. And then we started seeing houses, public buildings, private houses being touched, police stations and all whatnot, being media houses being touched left, right, center, across.
And primarily in Lagos, but in other contexts. And so just conscious of time, I suppose, I mean, and this is unfortunate because this is a very interesting part of the conversation, but I think we probably should try to do closing thoughts now. And then, I suppose this will give us maybe various places to pick up on in our next conversation. Maybe we should do sort of closing thoughts, reflecting perhaps on this question of, the sort of non-peaceful aspect that happened. And maybe how does both that and Buhari's speech tell us anything about where we're going from here? So the closing thought maybe is about fundamentally where to from here. And I don't know if you want to jump in, OAG, and then Emeka, and then myself, or
No, I think OAG should have a go at it. I mean, he's been sidelined. Yeah.
the left, the revolutionaries on the sidelines, as usual. Yeah. Sorry, mate.
I think, you just echoed my mind, Emeka. In terms of the organizational aspects, it was superb. Like, even the so-called older generations that, used to thumb their noses down on younger guys were like, look, we know how you guys did it, but the organization was on point, full music.
Absolutely.
That part was just, we're not taking anything away from that. It's just to infuse some sort of revolutionary character into this. It will have been so potent. Like, we need conscientization on the groundwork, talking to these people. In fact, meeting celebrities and conscientizing them so they know the strength that they have. Like, so these are opportunities that open up, and then of course, we're able to build on, funds, management, different things like that, but it wasn't bad at all. Just came at a very, very, serious price.
But don't you feel like the crackdown? But don't you feel like the crackdown by the state and the emergence of arson, looting, etc. afterwards? Is there any sense in which that partially invalidates this point you're making about the excellent organization, etc.?
It's all about the bigger picture. You can't have a society that lays waste to humanity and think that when you have small or some sort of shake in the social order, that those ones will sit down and not do anything.
Right.
If you make people constructive members of society, most of them will be at home or join the protests. Right. Society has laid waste to a huge amount of people, and those are the people that you are seeing now. So I don't have any problem. Society that wants people to be peaceful and all that, you give them peace. You educate them to make them constructive members of society. If we are the poverty capital of the world, what were we expecting?
Right.
For those ones to be in the house and not take... No. That's normal. It's normal. If society wants to fix things, it should get to work quickly uplifting people, quickly giving them basics of life, raising their consciousness, giving them human and humane things. Then maybe we'll see a different response.
Right.
A country that has, that's what poverty capital of the world, you can't expect anything different from that. So it's not a problem. Maybe because I see it as a broader picture like that, I don't even comment too much on that. And then, of course, it's the function of the ruling class to clamp down on people, the state. That's the function of the state in a revolutionary context. They are doing what it is that they are supposed to do. So it's just left for us to organize properly and deal a blow on their system, Who knows, it might be through the ballots, It might be through overwhelming civil disobedience. It might be through all-out action. Nobody has a crystal ball of how society, to predict what will happen. But let's just keep organizing, orienting people, sensitizing people, then get forward and keep the organizational spirit. It's very important.
Excellent.
So that's my thought on that.
Yeah, Mecca, what do you think?
I think it's important to point out that before the crackdown, there were already instances of violence. I mean, there were pockets of violence in and around, the country. Lagos, Port Harcourt, Ibadan, here, some other places. There was allegedly a jailbreak in Benin.
Yeah.
There were attempted jailbreaks, all over the country.
In Korea as well.
That some of them before, one of them before, many of them after the crackdown. So I don't think that the violence ensued, as a result, just only because of he amplified it. Of course, the crackdown did amplify it, but it's important to note that, there were already pockets of violence in and around.
Sure.
But the thing is, so we need to, so for people who are going to write about this, historians who are going to write about what happened in just 2 weeks, because people write books out of this, people make plays out of this, people make songs out of it. I think it's also important that we note or we state categorically that part of the reason why these initial pockets of violence, were visible was that it's the original peaceful protesters were being attacked by pro-SARS protesters. Now, nobody knows if there's no proof who sponsored the pro-SARS protesters to attack the EndSARS protesters. Some people think that it was state-sponsored, some people think that, they were, just genuine expression of people who were feeling the brunt, because, there were places, there are instances where not too far from where I live, which is the Ibadan Expressway. For hours on end, it was blocked. People spent, 5 hours, 6 hours in traffic trying to commute. And, so there was not real, so some people were saying because, this protest impinged on sources of livelihoods and maybe even cost people lives of their own, that this pro-SARS people were also a genuine expression of, I'm lost for words there, but I'm sure you get what I mean. But essentially what it is that those clashes already, were happening. And then subsequently, you then found that, even some police stations had already been, 1 or 2 police stations had been touched.
Okay, but
or even vandalized.
How do you conclude? Like, what does that mean? What conclusions does that lead you to? As we try to.
So my point is, maybe not as crudely, sorry, but maybe not the way Koichi puts it. I think that leads me to think about, the class composition of, the EndSARS protest thing, in effect, And so it leaves me wondering, not because, and this is because I haven't really thought about it, but it leaves me wondering at what point did, what you call the lumping elements buy into or get the sympathy of where did they begin to sympathize with the EndSARS protests? Who predominantly, in my own opinion, were members of the middle class, Nigerian youths. But because the people who led the violence, were people who have long been accustomed to police brutality in ways that even middle class Nigerian youths don't even know. Some of the stories that they would have to tell if they make it up, if they make it to Twitter would be mind-boggling. It would be shocking. That people would then realize that some of the stories you've heard thus far is only just the tip of the iceberg. So so for me, it's how the state's response to the EndSARS movement, how did it galvanize the support of the lower class youth population, who generally I feel bear the biggest brunt of police brutality? Right? At what point did the state's response prompt the buy-in of that class of people?
Yeah. No, that's quite interesting, right? So you're posing a question, and I think it's one that, we should probably explore some more, in the course of this conversation, the sort of class composition of this protest movement, and perhaps how that compares to other moments in Nigeria's history and in sort of wider protest or revolutionary history more generally. So thanks for that. I mean, I guess how I would sum up is to say, as we've said in the conversation, there are several really innovative, really interesting things about this moment. One of them was the Lekki toll gate blockage. The fact that we were confronting the state not through going to stand outside of the offices of government, which we've done before, which we were doing this time, which has its purpose and place, but what the Lekki toll gate sort of location did that it seems a lot of protests hadn't done before is that they also put pressure on the market. They put pressure on the sort of purse, the money aspect of society, and of power in society. And so clearly that, and I think it's no accident, therefore, that it was in Lekki that the army first showed up to shoot protesters, right? And there'll be a lot of course, this is something that's probably going to go into a sort of extended legal battle.
Capital and the state.
Right, but it was this kind of intersection, absolutely, of capital and the state where we saw that response. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think the fundamental question, where it leaves me right now, is that I see that as a question of strategy that has been very, very forcefully raised by this movement, that I think the left and all broader social forces that want some sort of progressive transformation of society have to take into account. I think the other thing is that this protest dispelled with some very, very common stereotypes about Nigerians that I think have been holding back progressive movements. One, that you can't organize outside of ethnicity or religion in Nigeria. And I know there were debates about this within the movement, but I think it's clear that this wasn't an ethnic or religious agenda. It surpassed that, suggesting that there are issues that you can get quite a broad swathe of across sort of identity groups, people to identify with, and so it sort of shot down a classic conservative, kind of approach in Nigeria to try to split people into ethnic groups in order to, redistribute resources or engage in any kind of social action. And then I think a final thing is that it also dispelled with the idea, to some extent, that we're all too scared to do anything about the situation that we're in. That people actually...
The lazy generation.
Absolutely. That this is a sort of lazy generation, or that this is a scared generation. People got out on the street, without any clear indication of without any guarantee that it would be safe. And in fact, it wasn't safe, right? People were attacked from all corners, either by so-called state-sponsored thugs or by by state-sponsored thugs in uniform or by state-sponsored thugs out of uniform. But there was clear, people were attacked, and yet people protested. So that's something to take away. But I guess there's a lingering question here about, that we haven't resolved, and as OAG said, we have no kind of way to see the future, no kind of crystal ball. But we're in a moment of some uncertainty about where to begin. But I mean, about where to go from here, rather. But what's clear is that the leadership role, if any, that the left should provide in moments like this was vacant, right? The left, in a sense, was also somehow leaderless, as it were. And I think that's something that we have to kind of explore and consider going forward.
meant so much to me, darling. So much I never knew. You were all the life was worth for, and you only had the key.